trade, which are certainly not going to abandon on their account. Very cordially yours, Freud.
11 March 1909. Dear Professor Freud, I must answer you at once. Your kind words have relieved and comforted me. The story hawked round by Muthman is Chinese to me. I've never really had a mistress and am the most innocent of spouses. Hence my terrific moral reaction. I simply cannot imagine who it might have been. I don't think it is the same lady. Such stories give me the horrors. Most sincerely yours, Jung.
June 3rd of 1909. Dear friend, of course I understand your silence, and even now I would leave you more time if another letter, which I enclose, had not reached me at the same time as yours. Weird. What is she? A busybody? A chatterbox? Or a paranoiac? If you know anything about the writer or have some opinion in the matter, would you kindly send me a short wire, or otherwise you must not go to any trouble. If I don't hear from you, I shall assume that you know nothing. Yours, Freud.
4 June 1909. Dear Professor Freud, in accordance with your wish, I sent you a telegram this morning, framing it as clearly as I could. At the moment, I didn't know what more to say. Spielrein is the person I wrote you about. She was published in abbreviated form in my Amsterdam lecture. She was, so to speak, my test case. For which reason, I remembered her with special gratitude and affection. Since I knew from experience that she would immediately relapse if I withdrew my support, I prolonged the relationship over the years, and in the end found myself morally obliged, as it were, to devote a large measure of friendship to her, until I saw that an unintended wheel had started turning, whereupon I finally broke with her. She was, of course, systematically planning my seduction, which I considered inopportune. Now she is seeking revenge. Lately, she has been spreading a rumor that I shall soon get a divorce from my wife and marry a certain girl student, which has thrown not a few of my colleagues into a flutter. What she is now planning is unknown to me. Nothing good, I suspect. Unless, perhaps you are imposed upon to act as a go-between. I need hardly say that I have made a clean break. To none of my patients have I extended so much friendship, and from none have I reaped so much sorrow. With kindest regards, Jung.
Dear friend, Fräulein Spielrein has admitted in her second letter that her business has to do with you. Apart from that, she has not disclosed her intentions. My reply was ever so wise and penetrating. I made it appear as though the most tenuous of clues had enabled me Sherlock Holmes-like to guess the situation, which of course was none too difficult after communications, and suggested a more appropriate procedure, something endopsychic, as it were. Whether it will be effective, I don't know, but now I must entreat you, don't go too far in the direction of contrition and reaction. In the view of the kind of matter we work with, it will never be possible to avoid little laboratory explosions. Maybe we didn't slant the test tube enough, or we heated it too quickly. In this way we learn what part of the danger lies in the matter, and what part in our way of handling it. Cordially yours, Freud.
21 June 1909. Dear Professor Freud, I have good news to report of my Spielrein affair. I took too black a view of things. After breaking with her, I was almost certain of her revenge and was deeply disappointed only by the banality of the form it took. The day before yesterday, she turned up at my house and had a very decent talk with me, during which it transpired that the rumor buzzing about me does not emanate from her at all. Her intention to come to you was not aimed at any intrigue, but only at paving the way for a talk with me. Now, after your second letter, she has come to me in person. Although not succumbing to helpless remorse, I nevertheless deplore the sins I have committed, for I am largely to blame for the high-flying hopes of my former patient. In accordance with my original principle of taking everyone seriously to the utmost limit, I had discussed with her the problem of a child, imagining that I was talking theoretically. But naturally, Eros was lurking in the background. Thus, I imputed all the wishes and hopes entirely to my patient without seeing the same thing in myself. When the situation had become so tense that the continued relationship could be rounded out only by sexual acts, I defended myself in a manner that cannot be justified morally. Caught in my delusion that I was the victim of the sexual wiles of my patient, I wrote to her mother that I was not the gratifier of her daughter's sexual desires, but merely her doctor, and that she should free me from her. In view of the fact that the patient had shortly before been my friend and enjoyed my full confidence, my action was a piece of knavery, which I very reluctantly confessed to you as my father. I would now like to ask you a great favor. Would you please write a note to Fräulein Spielrein, telling her that I have fully informed you of the matter, and especially of the letter to her parents, which is what I regret most. I would like to give my patient at least this satisfaction, that you and she know of my perfect honesty. It was my stupidity to draw you into this imbroglio, but now I am extremely glad that I was not mistaken after all about the character of my patient. Otherwise, I should have been left with a gnawing doubt as to the soundness of my judgment. And this would have been a considerable hindrance to me in my work. Best regards, gratefully yours, Jung. 30 January 1910. Dear Professor, during the time when I didn't write to you, I was plagued by complexes, and I detest wailing letters. This time it was not I who was duped by the devil, but my wife, who lent an ear to the evil spirit and staged a number of jealous scenes groundlessly. At first, my objectivity got out of joint, but afterwards snapped back again, whereupon my wife also straightened herself out brilliantly. Analysis of one's spouse is one of the more difficult things, unless mutual freedom is assured. The prerequisite for a good marriage, it seems to me, is the license to be unfaithful. I, in my turn, have learned a great deal. Yours, Jung.
February 2nd, 1910. Dear friend, I should have thought it quite impossible to analyze one's own wife. Sincerely yours, Freud.
17 April 1910. Dear Professor Freud, at present I am pursuing my mythological dreams with almost autoerotic pleasure, dropping only meager hints to my friends. I also notice that my whole desire for publication is concentrated on the Jahrbuch, which seems to soak up all my libido. Probably it must be so. I often feel I am wandering alone through a strange country, seeing wonderful things that no one has seen before and no one needs to see. It was like that when the psychology of dementia praecox dawned upon me. Only I don't yet know what will come of it. I must just let myself be carried along, trusting to God that in the end I shall make a landfall somewhere. Yours sincerely, Jung.
We have now come to the year 1911. As I chose letters to be read, I noticed I didn't have anything from that year. So I went back and read it and realized the men were only writing about business to one another. What was simmering below the surface could be found in a few letters written by Emma, Carl's wife, to Sigmund Freud. Unfortunately, Freud's letters were not preserved. In 1911, Jung wrote and published in Jahrbuch a long article called Transformations of Libido, Part 1. This became the first part of the book, later known as Symbols of Transformation. His Jahrbuch article described how classic myths and universal legends could be used to express and explain basic psychological concepts. Freud absolutely avoided writing about this article or even speaking of it when he visited the Jung family. Emma addressed it though. Let's listen to Emma's letters as a brief interlude between the two men.
October 30th, 1911. Dear Professor Freud, I don't really know how I am summoning the courage to write you this letter, but I'm certain it is not from presumption. Rather, I am following the voice of my unconscious, which I have so often found was right, and which I hope will not lead me astray this time. Since your visit, I have been tormented by the idea that your relation with my husband is not altogether as it should be. And since it definitely ought not to be like this, I want to try to do whatever is in my power. I do not know whether I am deceiving myself when I think you are somehow not quite in agreement with transformations of libido. You didn't speak of it at all, and yet I think it would do you both so much good if you got down to a thorough discussion of it. Or is it something else? If so, please tell me what, dear Herr Professor, for I cannot bear to see you so resigned, and I even believe that your resignation relates not only to your real children, it made quite a special impression on me when you spoke of it, but also to your spiritual sons. Otherwise, you would have so little need to be resigned. Please do not take my action as officiousness, and do not count me among the women who, you once told me, always spoil your friendships. My husband naturally knows nothing of this letter, and I beg you not to hold him responsible for it or to let any kind of unpleasant effects it may have on you glance off on him. I hope nevertheless that you will not be angry with your very admiring Emma Jung. November 6th, 1911. My dear Professor Freud, your nice, kind letter has relieved me of anxious doubts, for I was afraid that in the end I had done something stupid. In explanation of my conjectures, I would like to tell you first that it is not a question at all of things consciously perceived. I talked about symbols because it was chiefly because I know that Carl eagerly was waiting for your opinion. He had often said he was sure you would not approve of it, and for that reason was waiting for your verdict with some trepidation. Of course, this was only a residue of the father complex, which is probably being resolved in this book. For actually, Carl, if he holds something to be right, would have no need to worry about anybody else's opinion. So perhaps it is all to the good that you did not react at once so as not to reinforce this father-son relationship. The second reason was provided by the conversation on the first morning after your arrival when you told me about your family. Please don't be angry if I venture to speak again about the manifest content of your talk. I wanted to ask then if you are sure that your children would not be helped by analysis. One certainly cannot be the child of a great man with impunity, considering the trouble one has in getting away from ordinary fathers. And when this distinguished father also has a streak of paternalism in him, as you yourself said, didn't the fracture of your son's leg fit with this pattern? When I asked you about it, you said you didn't have time to analyze your children's dreams because you had to earn money so that they could go on dreaming. Do you think this attitude is right? I would prefer to think that one should not dream at all. One should live. I have found with Carl also that the imperative earn money is only an evasion of something else to which he has resistances. Please forgive me this candor. It may strike you as brazen, but it disturbs my image of you because I somehow cannot bring it into harmony with the other side of your nature, and this matters so much to me. You may imagine how overjoyed and honored I am by the confidence you have in Carl, but it almost seems to me as though you were sometimes giving too much. Do you not see in him the follower and fulfiller more than you need? Doesn't one often give much because one wants to keep much? Why are you thinking of giving up already instead of enjoying your well-earned fame and success? Perhaps for fear of letting the right moment for it pass you by? Surely this will never happen to you. After all, you're not so old that you could speak now of the way of regression, what with all these splendid and fruitful ideas you have in your head. Besides, the man who has discovered the living fountain of psychoanalysis, or don't you believe it is one, will not grow old so quickly. No, you should rejoice and drink to the full the happiness of a victory after having struggled for so long. And do not think of Carl with a father's feeling. He will grow, but I must dwindle. But rather, as one human being thinks of another, who, like you, has his own law to fulfill. Don't be angry with me. With warm love and veneration, Emma Jung. Dear Professor Freud, you were really annoyed by my letter, weren't you? I was too, and now I am cured of my megalomania and am wondering why the devil, the unconscious, had to make you, of all people, the victim of this madness. And here I must confess, very reluctantly, that you are right. My last letter, especially the tone of it, was really directed to the father imago, which should of course be faced without fear. But this thought never entered my head. I thought that knowing the transference side of my father attitude towards you, it would all be quite clear and do me no harm. You can imagine how delighted I am to have made a fool of myself in front of you. I can only pray and hope that your judgment will not prove too severe. There is one thing, however, I must vigorously defend myself against, and that is the way you take my amiable carpings, as you call them. Lately, Carl has been analyzing his attitude to his work and has discovered some resistances to it. I had connected these misgivings about Part 2 with his constant worry over what you would have to say about it. It seemed out of the question that he would have resistances to his own work, but now it appears that this fear of your opinion was only a pretext for not going on with the self-analysis which this work in fact means. You also have completely misunderstood my admittedly uncalled for meddling in your family affairs. I know that with your children it is a matter of physical illnesses, but just wanted to raise the question whether these physical symptoms might not be somehow psychically conditioned. So that there might, for instance, be a reduced power of resistance. Since I have made some very astonishing discoveries in myself in this respect, and do not consider myself excessively degenerate or markedly hysterical, I thought similar phenomenon might be possible with other people too. I shall be grateful for enlightenment. That you should think it worthwhile to discuss your most personal affairs with me is something for which I thank you with all my heart. What you tell me sounds so convincing that I simply have to believe it, although much in me struggles against it. But I must admit that you have the experience and I do not. Consequently, I am unable to make any convincing rejoinders. You are quite right about one thing. Despite everything and everybody, the whole affair is only a blessing in clumsy disguise, which I beg you to forgive. Please, write nothing of this to Carl. Things are going badly enough with me as it is. Emma Jung.
We're skipping ahead now to 1912. In September, Emma Jung sent off prints of part 2 of Jung's Transformations and Symbols to Freud, along with a warm letter, and there's no response noted. Part 2 is published of Jung's Transformation and Symbols of the Libido in Jahrbuch. In November 6th, Steckel resigns from the Psychoanalytic Society rather than accept Freud's proposal that Victor Tosk edit book reviews. Steckel wants to continue as editor of the Zentralblatt. Freud resigns as director of the journal. This is happening while Jung is in America. On November 11th, Jung sends a telegram to Freud that he agrees with Steckel's removal as the editor, but not with Freud's resignation. Earlier correspondence between Freud and Ricklin regarding the situation is missing. Freud's breach of contract caused financial difficulties for the Psychoanalytic Society.
11 November 1912. Dear Professor Freud, I have just got back from America and hasten to give you my news. I found the activities of the Psychoanalytic Society most satisfactory. There are some really bright people in it. Altogether, the psychoanalytic movement over there has enjoyed a tremendous upswing since we were last in America. Everywhere I met with great interest and was favorably received. Thus, I had rich soil to work on and was able to do a very great deal for the spread of the movement. Naturally, I also made room for those of my views, which deviate in places from the hitherto existing conceptions, particularly in regard to the libido theory. I found that my version of psychoanalysis won over many people who until now had been put off by the problem of sexuality and neurosis. As soon as I have an off-print, I shall take pleasure in sending you a copy of my lectures, in the hope that you will gradually come to accept certain innovations already hinted at in my libido paper. I feel no need to let you down, provided you can take an objective view of our common endeavors. I regret it very much if you think that the modifications in question have been prompted solely by resistance to you. With me, it is not a question of caprice, but of fighting for what I hold to be true. In this matter, no personal regard for you can restrain me.